Okay, let's get rolling. Welcome and good afternoon to all. My name is Todd Millar, and I will be your host for today's event. And I would like to thank you. I'd like to start by just saying thank you for taking the time out to join us. You know, as TEC Canada's president and CEO, I have had the privilege to work with many of you and leaders like you, almost 12 years, as a matter of fact, and it truly has been inspiring and a transformational experience. Now, today's event is an exclusive one. It's available only to members, and it's great to see such an awesome turnout of both members and, of course, our chairs who are also invited. So let's get to it. We're here to discuss a topic that's relevant to all of us: the economic landscape for the first quarter in 2024, and all the associated important topics that impact your business. And within that discussion, TEC Canada's CEO Confidence Index for Q1 2024, which is a quarterly survey measuring the confidence of Canadian business leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises. And this survey was conducted from November 24th, 23 to December 22nd, 2023. And we're very pleased that we had 417 participants. Now, we have included the most recent CEO Confidence Index and the latest Andersen report in the chat area. So you're welcome to download these reports and share them with your teams. And if you have any questions, we would encourage you to place them in the Q&A section. And if we don't get to your question during the time allotted, we'll make sure that we get to Dr. Andersen and have the answers afterwards forwarded directly to you offline. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the man who reviews the data, provides the insights, and helps us index that information with past CEO confidence reports. He also delivers, as I mentioned, the Andersen Economic Report every month, which is available to members online at teccanada.com and through the TEC Canada app. Both the Andersen Report and the CEO Confidence Index are great resources for our tech community. So, Dr. Peter Andersen is an independent consulting economist specializing in economic forecasting. He obtained his doctorate in economics from Harvard University. Early in his career, he was the assistant chief of the Bank of Canada's research department, where he advised the governor and the Bank of Canada on economic conditions and the economic outlook. Dr. Andersen has also spent several years with several major Bay Street investment firms and Bay Street investment dealer firms before founding Andersen Economic Research, Inc. He acts as a filter, separating the signals from the noise in order to provide clients with the useful information that they really need. So without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Peter Andersen. Welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Todd, thanks very much for having me, and for everybody on the call, thank you very much for your time. But I'm just going to say a few words before we get into my slides. I've got a few slides to show. You know, I love slides. I think they say 1,000 words. But let me just say that things are a challenge out there to look in the crystal ball, because the economic models just aren't working the way they have for years in the past. The cause and effect relationships, they've all changed. It's different now. And economic models depend on that. Economic models look at cause and effect. You know, how do consumers and businesses react to interest rates and government policy and so on? And it's, I think, been the pandemic, because the pandemic has really changed behavior. And the job market in particular is really center ice, so to speak, when it comes to this behavioral change. Job shortages and no layoffs. And Todd, my feeling is simple. I like to keep things simple. It's one of my philosophies. If we don't have layoffs, how can we have a recession?
Yes.
So that's my bottom line. Employers, they might be holding back a bit on hiring. The intensity and the drive to hire workers might have faded a bit, but employers are just telling us, Todd, that they do not want to lay off workers. We still have labor shortages, significant labor shortages. And that's one of the reasons artificial intelligence, I think, is coming on so fast. We really do have a tidal wave of technological acceleration. Artificial intelligence is coming on so fast, and it isn't just for tech developers anymore. It's now a CEO boardroom agenda item. What does it mean? How can it be used? How can we be cautious about firm and client data? All of that. So just to summarize how I see the economy, I think that we have a weaker Canadian economy than in the United States. I don't think Canada is in a recession, even though many of our members do. But I do think the Bank of Canada is going to move first. I think the bank will cut rates before the Federal Reserve. And I think that that's going to have an effect on the Canadian dollar. So I am predicting or expecting, let's put it that way, expecting the Canadian dollar to weaken, because I think there are false hopes in the United States that we'll see large and sudden interest rate cuts. But Canada does look weaker. One example I'll give you, Todd, is the latest job numbers. Here's a skill testing question. How many net new jobs were created in Canada between November and December? 100. That's all. Just 100.
Yeah, actually, it was
100. Yeah, just 100. And in the United States, the number net new job creation from the payroll survey, 216,000 jobs created in 1 month between November and December. We had 100. But the issue really ties in with inflation. Now, we do get inflation news tomorrow for Canada for the month of December. And my worry, Todd, is that we have sticky inflation in Canada. People say, oh, it's great. You know, it's come down from a high level a year ago to where we are now. But I think that the last mile is the hardest. And getting it down from the mid 3% range is going to be hard. Getting it down close to 2. And one of the things our members are saying, Todd, is that while they're pessimistic on the economy, they think they can pass on cost pressure to the customers. Yep. So that was a strong message. We aren't going to see many layoffs at all. And our members, the small and medium-sized business community, thinks that it's okay when they have pricing power and their profits are going to be held up, going to be okay, because those cost pressures can be passed on, in selling prices to customers. And the bottom line is that our members still think that they are going to be looking at 4 to 5% compensation increases. Now, over 5%, without any improvement in productivity. So it's just a way to get started, Todd, in terms of our discussion today. Those are some of my initial thoughts to throw.
Well, that's a great place to start, Dr. Andersen. I really appreciate that overview, and I know our members will have plenty of questions as we go through this. I wonder if this might be an appropriate time to start with slide number 1.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
And this is the big issue, inflation. And you know, it's a big change, Todd, because the previous decade was a low inflation world. And, that was the normal. The normal was just continuing low inflation. This chart that I have up here is what I think the Bank of Canada really looks at. Um, the media will talk about the 12-month change, but that's not really the full story because the 12-month change is biased by what happened a year ago.
Yeah.
If you take out a big inflation number a year ago and add in a new month of lower inflation, sure, the year-to-year 12-month change will come down. But the real challenge, though, is what happens at the margin. And this is what this first slide shows. This is what's happening at the margin in terms of the trend, the most recent trend direction. And you notice that the title here, it's core. We've taken out energy because they bounced around too much.
Okay.
And looking at what we think is the underlying rate of price increase. And we're not just looking at the change from the month before, we're looking at the change from 3 months before. So this line in here, this red line that we're looking at, is the change from 3 months before, and it's a time series of those 3-month changes. And what I've done is to make it kind of, I guess, clearer from a rule of thumb point of view, I'm showing it at annualized rates. Okay?
Yep.
So let's say we have an increase on the month of 0.3%. Okay, 0.3%. In order to annualize that, you don't just multiply it by 12. You take 1.003 to the power of 12. Okay. And that's how you get an annualized number. So what I've done is I've annualized the 3-month changes in the consumer price index, the core measure, and take a look at the direction the line is going in. The line is not going on a steady rate of decline. The line got down to a low level around the middle of 23. And since then, it's actually been going the wrong way, Todd.
Yeah.
So if you were running the Bank of Canada, you would say, whoops, this is not what's supposed to be happening. Interest rates are supposed to cause inflation to cool off, but this line is not going down, it's going up. So stay tuned for tomorrow's news, and we'll see what happens, and we'll see how the media treats it.
Yeah.
But I think that the enthusiasm and the hopes for sudden declines in interest rates on either side of the border, I think they're an exaggeration, and I don't think they have the correct interpretation. But it does look to me that when interest rate cuts do come, Todd, I think they're going to come first in Canada because, like I said, those 100 jobs in the latest month doesn't look so good.
Yep. I understand.
That's the story. It's a complicated story, and my bottom line basic worry is that interest rates stay higher than we would like because inflation isn't cooperating by coming down. Inflation is sticky. So that's my message in terms of that slide.
Fantastic. And I'm quite sure we're going to have more dialogue about inflation, but Golden, maybe I can go to slide number 2.
All right, here we go. Now, here we go with the job market. These are open jobs. Open jobs. These are jobs that are being actively promoted. Companies are making deliberate behavior to try to fill these jobs. This is not just kind of somebody's random idea. This is what's actually happening. They're making an effort to fill these jobs. So you can see that job vacancies, the number of available open jobs, they peaked in 2022, early in the year, and they've been coming down. So what that says is that the hype in terms of hiring has started to cool off. one way of looking at this diagram is to go to the left, Todd, and look at 2019, because that is pre-COVID. That's your pre-COVID, pre-pandemic era. And hey, we're almost down there. Now, the Americans have a similar data on job vacancies, open jobs. They're coming down too, but not as much as ours. And so the job market is stronger in the United States than it is in Canada. In the United States, we have just under 1.5 job openings for every unemployed person. And that's not the case in Canada. In Canada, we have more unemployed people than we have job openings, whereas it's just the reverse in the United States. So this shows me that Canada's economy is weaker than the US. It ties in with what we're hearing from our members, because our members are telling us that they think that general economic conditions will worsen. Now, that doesn't mean a contraction or a decline or negative volume activity, but it means it's not as good as it used to be. Fewer people are making their business targets.
Yep.
Now, the interesting thing the next slide shows is that Canadian workers, even though the job market is not the way it used to be, Canadian workers really want to catch up. They want to catch up with the cost of living. And my son-in-law the other day, they have some dogs and cats, and he was complaining about kitty litter prices and about dog food prices of all things. Talk about kind of a superficial worry to have, right? But he was saying that, with dog food, it had gone from $9 to $18. And that's what's happened, since the pandemic started, right? So people are wanting to catch up, even though the month-to-month change in the consumer price index has cooled off a bit from a year ago and 2 years ago. So look at what's happening with average wages in this labor cost diagram. The latest number that we have from Canada, Todd, was that even though we only had 100 jobs net produced in December, average hourly wages were running over 5% higher than a year ago.
Yeah.
Well, so workers realize that there are not as many job openings out there. But people understand the layoffs aren't happening either.
Yeah.
So without layoffs, there isn't fear of job loss. And because of that, people are being aggressive, pushing for higher compensation. And that's wages, salaries, and benefits. Right here, we're just looking at average hourly wages. But you can see that the month before we were under 5%. Then in December, it's 5.2. That's a 12-month change.
Yeah.
And the problem is that companies really can't offset these cost pressures with productivity. The next diagram, and that's the last diagram, this is the actual level of business productivity in Canada. And what it means is that we've had, in this diagram, it shows 2 years of declining year-over-year productivity. So that 5.2% wage increase doesn't have a productivity offset. If you throw in declining productivity, that means the cost of producing that one more piece of output is going to be more than 5% because productivity is negative. You're going to have to put more inputs into producing that one new additional piece of output. So our members are telling us that they do think we have pricing power and we can pass on costs to our customers. So that's not what the Bank of Canada wants to hear either, is it? The Bank of Canada wants to hear, hey, we're belt tightening, and we're not going to pass on cost increases to our customers. We're belt tightening. We're going to do something different with our company, organization, or whatever. So that's where I'm coming from, Todd. I think we've got a problem here, an underlying structural problem when it comes to production costs, prices, and what's going to happen with inflation. So that's kind of the story from those 4 charts.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And thank you for that, Dr. Andersen. We do have one question. I know that actually you and I ironically talked a little bit about this offline, and I know it's in our CEO Confidence Index, but you talk more about the percentage of CEOs that actually think they can pass on cost to customers, and at what point or or the percentage that they.
The number that we have is that 45% responded, and we had a good number of responses. We have approximately 400 tech CEOs responding to this survey, and that is a big number to have a survey with 400 responses. That really means something. And just under half, 45%, said yes, they thought they could pass on cost increases. And there was others were not sure. I mean, that was a definite yes. 45% said yes, we can pass on cost increases. But another 24% said maybe, not sure, but maybe. And we only had 31% say no. So we only had a flat no, we can't pass on cost increases from 31%. So to me, that's interesting. That's good information to have.
It certainly is. And of course, it takes, I guess it begs the second part of that question, which perhaps we don't know the answer to inside of the data that we've collected so far, but what percentage of customers won't accept a price increase? Of course, that would be the million-dollar question, wouldn't it?
Well, I guess it's a chain, isn't it? What is the new normal? Is the new normal a system where, yes, I have just been faced with a cost increase from my supplier, but on the other hand, I think I can pass that cost increase down the line to the people that I'm supplying. And when it comes to individuals at the end of the line, the ultimate final consumer, you and me, in other words, we're saying to ourselves, well, we better push for higher compensation because we want to stay even with the cost of living. And the problem is, Todd, the cost of living comparison really goes back almost 4 or 5 years. I mean, average people, you and me, we want to be able to get back to kind of the cost of living standards of 2018 and 2019.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I know this is a loaded question, Peter, but you'd be disappointed if I didn't give you a loaded question every now and then. How about a crystal ball? Tomorrow is a big day, Tuesday. Of course, we're all waiting to hear what we're going to hear around inflation, I guess, is the primary message. Do you have what do you think we're going to hear?
Well, what I think is important is to put energy to one side because gasoline prices have been coming down. Crude oil, strangely enough, even though we've got all the international frictions and uncertainties taking place on a geopolitical basis, the price of oil, isn't headed up to $80 a barrel. It seems to be headed really down to $70 a barrel instead. So put gasoline prices and energy to one side and look at the core measure. And here's the number for you, Todd, 0.3% on the month. And what is that at annual rates? Well, on your smartphone, just go to your calculator put in 1.003 to the power of 12. And hey, that's getting pretty close to 4%. It's in the high threes. It's not just 3.6, it comes in at 3.7, 3.8 thereabouts, compounded.
So, and as you, yeah, sorry.
If you get 0.3 every month for the next 12 months, that's what I'm saying if you annualize. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, and of course, as you've alluded to in the past, Peter, and I think we talked about already today in one of your slides. I mean, in order to get interest rates that would actually start to get a break from the Bank of Canada, you'd have to see that change. You'd have to see lower inflation.
Well, I think if you or I were running the Bank of Canada, we would want to see inflation coming in under 3% on a stable basis. We would, if you or I were sitting in the governor's office at the Bank of Canada in Ottawa, we would probably be willing to cut interest rates before we actually got to 2.0. We'd probably be willing to cut interest rates if rates came down to 2.5 to 2.75% on an annualized basis. So it looked like they were staying there, because we would think that our policy system has a lag in it. And what we do today with interest rates won't have an effect for another, 5 or 6 months. So we would think, okay, inflation's now at 2.5 or 2.7. What we did 6 months ago is still going to push it lower next month and the month after. So it's okay to start cutting at 2.5 or 2.7 on the inflation number.
Yeah. So I guess we wouldn't necessarily be anticipating any significant change in interest rates over the course of this year.
Well, it's interesting what our members are saying, Chad, because we do ask the question in our survey: what do you think inflation is going to be like 12 months out from now? What's your 1 year ahead look at inflation? Our members do think that inflation is coming down. The survey that we did last fall, 3 months ago, had the median number, and that's the central tendency of answers, coming in that inflation would be somewhere in the 4% range. And that's come down now because the most recent forecast, and Todd, thank you very much to the respondents to the survey, because wow, this is about as real time as you can get with information, because our survey was closed off, what was it, December 1st, 2nd of December. Yeah, this is really up-to-date information. So the central tendency now for the approximate 400 responses is that inflation would be in the 3% range on a 1 year out basis. So our members do buy the story that inflation's coming down, but we're still saying, hey, 12 months out, 1 year out, it's still in 3% territory. It's not 2.
Yeah, understood. That last slide that you had up, Peter, was about productivity, and I think it was specific to Canada. Am I correct in that?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Any perspective that you might offer our attendees today on productivity in the U.S.?
Well, productivity in the U.S. is going the other way, Todd. It is increasing, and the most recent calendar quarter does show what I was surprised at. It was larger than expected in the United States, but the trend line in the United States looks to be somewhere between 1 and 2% positive on the inflation growth, on the productivity growth. So in other words, if you're running at, let's say, a 4% wage labor compensation number, well, then your productivity of 1.5% is going to bring that down to, something like 2.5%, 2.5% bottom line labor compensation costs. And the reason I'm talking about this so much, Todd, is because this is such a big part of the cost of sales for any company is labor compensation. I know there are other ingredients, other inputs that go into costs that have to be, kind of implemented into pricing. But I'm saying labor is a big component of that cost of sales. So if you have 4% compensation and 1.5% productivity, there you go. It's okay. You can get down to the 2.5% on your pricing.
Yeah, there you go. Well, let me go back to Canadian productivity, and perhaps an unfair question, but I'll ask it on behalf of our attendees, regardless. So let's assume that Canadian productivity. Let's just assume that we can't reverse it, or it doesn't change, doesn't reverse to the decline that we're experiencing. How does that correlate to quality of life, in your opinion?
Well, I think that, it's a basic thing, productivity, because productivity really has to do with real incomes and real wages that one can expect over time. And the better your productivity performance, the better you would do when it came to real income for employees. How do we deal with this, Todd? Well, for one thing, it is a bit of a mystery. I really think it's a head scratcher on why Canada's productivity performance is so terrible in capital letters. Terrible. I don't know. I just don't get it because, we're so similar to the United States. I don't know. I would say, though, our members representing small and medium-sized businesses, I think our members get it because our members are showing that there is a real interest in the community, in the tech community, on business investment. Even though there's, concern about the general economy, this is amazing that we have such a high percentage of our members saying that they will increase capital expenditures over the next 12 months. Just under 80%. 79% of our members say that they will be increasing capital expenditures. And I think a lot of it is going to be high tech. We're not talking about old school nuts and bolts. I think we're going to be talking about software, changes in methodology and changes in company makeup, composition. And I do think that the pandemic has really brought on what I would say a tidal wave of tech acceleration. So I think a lot of this capital expenditure is going to be tech related.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going back to inflation again, Dr. Andersen, as you can probably appreciate, on everyone's mind as we're seeing by the questions that are coming in. But when you think about the environment that we're in today, we've got these obviously interest rates playing havoc. We've got taxes playing into a variable that perhaps we haven't seen. Specifically, I think we're referring to carbon tax issues in Canada. And how does the Bank of Canada, how do they get a handle on all that? How do they normalize and give us a view that kind of takes control of those interest rate issues and taxation issues and gives us a normal view?
Well, I'll tell you, I think in both sides of the border, we really do have a government spending problem. And what's happening right now is that interest expense is getting to be such a big budget item for both the Canadian and the American governments that we do have, I think we do have an unstable system when it comes to government finances and government budgets and government debt. Now, I'm always careful, Todd, not to get into politics, but of course, start talking about government deficits and government spending. I would say both in the United States and in Canada, the governments are working against what the central banks are trying to do. I think we're getting basically over the top deficit spending in both Canada and the United States. And to me, that's going the other way. That's pouring gasoline on the fire, so to speak, and making the inflation problem even more difficult.
A bigger challenge for sure. Yeah. And that's obviously, well, I mean, not to build on your story of your son and the dog food, but doubling the cost of dog food, suddenly there you go. I mean, why is that? Which, by the way, I'm sensitive to that because I do appreciate, and some of our attendees might be thinking this as well. That's a real issue, I think, in both countries, States and Canada, with pets. And people got pets and now they can't afford them. And what do they do with their pet? But I digress. When we have the conversation about technology, and specifically when I go back to you made the comment that our members are talking about spending dollars. Do you think that there's going to be a relationship to increase capex as it relates to technology? Will that increase productivity, in your opinion?
Oh, definitely, I believe so. Yes, and we've heard this said many times before, Todd, but I think that the pandemic has been an accelerator. It's accelerated a lot of trends that were already in place and established, but it's really made them move much faster. And I do think that software technology and that kind of capital spending is really going to play a big part. One of the old school phrases would be automation. But I think this is a different kind of automation. This is not nuts and bolts automation. This is automation when really we're looking at, kind of a new ballgame. So I think that these are new boardroom agenda items that our members are dealing with right now. These new opportunities when it comes to technology. And what does it mean and how can it be used? That there's a tendency to be cautious because it involves data in many cases, and that's sensitive material data, your firm's data, your client's data, and so on. Well, I think it's really coming on fast. In other words, the software revolution and this technology. So. One phrase that I heard, which was kind of a grabber to me, is that the whole idea of artificial intelligence, it's moved from the tool shed to the runway. How does that sound? I thought that was a good one.
Yeah, well, you could be bang on there for sure. I know that you made the comment, I believe, Peter, when you think about what our members are saying inside the CEO Confidence Index and their belief of a recession that I think it's either we're in it or it's coming. And I'm not so sure that that's your view. And with the assumption that it's not soft landing, we haven't used that phrase in a long time. Do you still anticipate using those words?
Well, soft landing is something that has become a narrative that's been increasingly looked on as the consensus outlook. And I'm trying to figure out what that sounds like, Todd, because it sounds like a dream, doesn't it? It sounds like a wonderful dream, and it's a soft landing. It's no problem. What I think people are trying to imagine is that inflation will come down to target. It will come down to target with the economy slowing, but not slowing too much. Okay. So it's like the baby bear's breakfast. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's just the right temperature. The economy slows enough to bring inflation down to target without causing a recession. Now, I'm skeptical, Todd, because I'm worried about sticky inflation. I'm worried that wages are in a catch-up mode. People want to restore the standard of living they had before the pandemic. We don't have the productivity offsets, but companies think they can pass on cost pressure to their customers and selling prices. So I guess what I would say is, what if there's no landing at all, Todd? Okay. Now, you're not hearing that from a lot of people, but it very well could be that in the United States, there's no landing at all. And what I mean by that is that the economy continues to grow at something that would be a normal rate. Maybe, let's put out a number, something like 2%. The economy grows at 2% in the United States, and inflation more or less stays where it is. So what happens is that there's a new normal out there, Todd. There's a new normal when it comes to inflation. People start to get in their head, yeah, it's going to be a 3% world, and interest rates are going to stay more or less where they are right now. Maybe down a bit, but nowhere close to where they used to be back in 2019. So what does that mean for Canada? I would say, Todd, I find it very hard to believe that we could have a made in Canada recession if there's no recession in the United States.
Okay.
They are our biggest customer. And I know our members are worried in terms of the amount of concern out there in our survey. Listen to this. 58% response rate in our survey that Canada is either in a recession right now or will soon be in one. 58% of our members are saying that. In Quebec, it's 60%, and in BC, it's 63% of our members say that, hey, we're in one, and if we're not in one, we'll soon be there. So I think that's an overstatement. But I understand if we only saw 100 jobs created in 1 month in December in Canada, yeah, but I'll get it that there's an uncertainty out there.
Yeah. Interesting times for sure. And I guess that, what resonated with me at the opening comments of our show today when you talked about the models aren't working, right? The traditional models, right? And
yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, the labor shortages and the supply chain shortages as well, Todd. Yeah, it was really interesting to me to see the response to supply chain in our survey. We had a big number, 72% of the responses, 72% of those 400 responses said they thought supply chain problems were diminished. Wow. And about the same percentage said they didn't feel pressure to increase inventories. In other words, inventories seem to be okay. Supply chain is working better. 72% basically happy with that. Now, I'm worried, of course, that the world is in trouble when it comes to ocean shipping, because what's happening with transportation from the Far East, if ships have to go around the south coast, the southern tip of Africa from the Far East, that adds 4,000 miles to the trip and adds another 10 days in one direction. So in terms of getting products to the market on time and the cost involved in ocean shipping, and that would apply to containers as well as tankers, we don't know how big this problem is going to be. It really has just kind of come to light, and it came to light kind of in November, December, and we were getting preoccupied with the holidays come December.
Yeah.
It's all connected, it seems, with the Hamas-Israel war. But the Houthis have this ability to be supported by Iran, and they're causing havoc with shipping that would come through the Red Sea, into the Suez Canal, and then into the Mediterranean. So if you're adding an extra 10 days to go around on the tip of Africa, boy, what's that going to do to the supply chain if that problem continues? And we don't know, of course. It's a wild card. We really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, certainly a concern, as you say, just in time alone, in terms of the disruption that would materialize inside a supply chain. That'll start to feel like pandemic periods of time again, won't it?
It would. And it's kind of like a warning that one has to expect the unexpected.
Yeah. Hey, Peter,
Easy to say, but hard to do.
I understand for sure. Looking for your opinion on a particular statement that I'm going to read. And do you believe that this is an overstatement, or what's your opinion on what I'm about to read? If people's perception is that we are in a recession, as kind of we're hearing in our CEO Competence Index, they will act. They will act as though we are, unless communication from Bank of Canada and government improves. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree with that question. I think it's a very good question. But I'll go back to my original comment that cause and effect behavior doesn't seem to be the same anymore. Because what we're hearing is just this big unwillingness to lay off workers. And yes, if you expect a recession, you're going to cool off your hiring efforts. You're not going to hire with the same kind of need or pack as before last year. But normally you'd be laying off workers. At least I would be. If it were my company and if it were my capital on the line, I would be laying off workers if I truly thought we were headed into a recession. But, that's not the story that we're getting. The story that we're getting is that layoffs are just not going to happen. 64% of our members are saying no layoffs. 64% say no layoffs. We have 29% saying yes, layoffs, or maybe considering. So yes, we're considering, or we're doing it already. We got 30% saying, but we have twice as many, 64% saying no layoffs. So that's really important, Todd, because if you don't think you're going to be laid off, you're going to keep on spending. You're going to keep on borrowing money. You're going to continue to press hard to get that wage and salary increase.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fully understand.
So it's a good question. And normally I would say, yes, that's right on.
Yeah.
But now it seems that it's the economic models, the cause and effect, don't seem to be working the way they normally do work.
Yeah, and you alluded to this or indicated this as well at the onset of our conversation, Peter, about behaviors have changed. The pandemic have changed behaviors, haven't they?
One of the things I'd add on is we do have some special situations in Canada there, and one of them is the population growth.
Yeah.
We have seen this over-the-top increase in the number of people in the country. Those people are not necessarily in the workforce, Todd, but they are out there consuming things. Okay? They need staples, the staples of life. They need to feed themselves. They need to clothe themselves. They need to shelter themselves. They are consumers. So again, to me, that's demand. That's adding to bottom line demand for goods and services in the country, this big immigration number that we're getting. And I'm hearing more and more the word crisis when it comes to housing. We have a housing crisis, and if the government has to go back to pre-war or post-war construction strategies in order to start building cheap, low-cost housing to solve the housing crisis. Doesn't sound like a recession coming out of that issue.
No. There's actually, ironically, there's just as we're having this conversation about population growth, obviously through immigration, well-known fact that we are all talking about. Opinion, again, hampering or adding prosperity in Canada?
Well, I think that, given the textbooks and given the demographics, I guess I'd have to say that demographic calculations, they're not short-term, they're not short-term issues. Demographics have to do with, you know, over a several years time span. And we do need more people because we are running out of people. Because the birth rate is very low. It's not high enough to replace the population. And we have a lot of retirements taking place as the baby boomers. The baby boom, in Canada went from basically 1947 to 1962, thereabouts. We'll do the math. They're getting a lot of baby boomers up there in their mid-60s retiring. So we need to replace those baby boom retiring boomers and also deal with the declining fertility replacement rates. But the issue is we have an infrastructure problem. We have this huge influx of people in the country, and the infrastructure just isn't in place to effectively do what we need to do in the short term. And the short term being the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months.
Yeah. The maybe just a slight slide from that conversation, and I think if I recall correctly, Peter, the Quebec, I think, was indicating the most negative kind of perspective inside of our CEO confidence index. So not necessarily BC, but this particular question's with regards to BC, and we know that there's all kinds of things going on in all provinces, but maybe in particular in BC, we've got inflation, taxes, housing crisis, obviously there as well. Government laws are changing with regards to the drug problem. I mean, there's just so many things going on. When you look at that, what do you think the short-term outcomes will be? Are we going to pull ourselves out of that? I mean, as it relates to economics around those elements, and is BC a picture of things to come?
Well, I guess a couple of things. First of all, let's deal with Quebec. 2023 was a tough year for TEC members across the country, from coast to coast. We had 63% in our surveys say that in 2023, things have got worse over the 12 months ending 2023. That's national, 63% national. In Quebec, it was 70%. 70% said that things had worsened. 71%, actually, to be exact. It was even more. It was 75% in British Columbia. So I guess looking at the two provinces, I do remember many times, Todd, when I went out to British Columbia, to Vancouver, and also to Victoria to speak with clients, I would get reminded all the time that British Columbia marches to the beat of a different drummer. British Columbia is so influenced by what happens in the Pacific Rim. So I think that the difficult business conditions in British Columbia have a lot to do with what's happening in China and what's happening basically in Southeast Asia connected to China. So China, which is supposed to be has been the economic growth superhero of the world, China has been stumbling and dealing with a lot of internal problems of its own. So that's I think, one of the reasons why British Columbia is showing this response. Quebec, well, let's take a look at the outlook. For 2024, which is one of our questions in the survey, we ask our respondents how they feel about the 12-month outlook. This is not for their own business. This is for the general economy. And we have 45% in our survey saying that things are going to get worse going ahead. 45%, just under 50. But in Quebec, it's over 60%. 62% in Quebec say they think that things will worsen going ahead in 2024. Now, BC doesn't stand out. BC is more or less in line with the national average looking ahead.
Yeah.
But Quebec still stands out with, hey, 62% think things will, a solid majority
Yeah.
think things will get worse this year for the general economy in Quebec. And then when it comes to pricing power, it's interesting here too, because in Quebec, when we ask the question, are you going to increase your own prices in the next 12 months? Only 38% in Quebec say yes, whereas 51% nationally say yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So that 51% that say yes nationally, that includes Quebec, right? It's not national excluding Quebec. So we got more than, a good majority in the other provinces say, yeah, we're increasing prices in the next 12 months, but not so in Quebec. Only 38% in Quebec say we're increasing prices.
That's interesting. It's interesting as it relates to productivity. Peter, I wonder if that's something we could share, or whether you have that today as you think about productivity by province. I know we show our productivity in Canada. Is that something that would be available to us?
Well, it's something that we can ask our members in our next survey, I suppose. We can kind of dig a bit deeper and ask our members in the different regions about, their thoughts on productivity, their strategy, how they might be dealing with it, and so on. We can work on that and fine tune some hard edge questions that can be useful to our members on that. Well, the economies, of course, are so different from coast to coast.
Sure.
Going from resources in the West to manufacturing in Central Canada.
Yeah. Well, as we get more and more participation, which we've been enjoying, and the diversity amongst our provinces with that enjoyment of total complement, that might be something that we can even build on as time goes on. I know it was a question from one of our attendees today, so we'll take that one away and see if we can't do something in that going forward. Now, look, it's 3:28, Peter. This just flew by for me. I don't know about you, but it flew by, and I want to respect everyone's time. I know there's a few questions, folks, that we didn't get to, and I apologize for that. But as I said at the beginning of the show, we'll make sure that we get those questions to Peter, and we will reply directly back to you. Hopefully, we know exactly who those questions came from. Some of them are anonymous, so if you want to make sure that you put that in the chat, I'll make sure that the guys in behind the scenes magically get those answers directly to you from Peter. So again, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you, members and chairs, for attending today's event and by supporting the entire process and taking the survey. It's so meaningful. You can just hear the richness of data that's coming from Peter in his review. That's a critical element of being a member at TEC Canada. I want to encourage you to continue to do that for us. And chairs, obviously, encourage all your members in your groups to participate. That would be so helpful. We've reached that critical threshold, the 25% participation in our membership, and I can see that even building more and more. And I know Peter always shares that this is the most relevant data that you can possibly get inside of Canada, which is just makes me feel so pleased of the participation level. TEC Canada, we're almost at that magical number of 2,000 members across Canada, and that's pretty remarkable. I'm feeling pretty wonderful about what this model is doing for the personal and professional growth of all of our members from coast to coast. So on that note, I want to thank you, Dr. Andersen, again for carving out some time for us. It's such a huge help in your analysis and your view on a monthly basis in the economic report, and certainly the CEO Confidence Index is so helpful to all of us here at TEC, in particular our members. So thank you very much. And on that note, I'll say goodbye to all, and thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.